The morning of my 72nd birthday, my daughter-in-law set a glass of orange juice in front of me and smiled like she always does. Wide, warm, the kind of smile that takes up her whole face. I used to love that smile. I used to think it meant she was happy to see me. I know better now. I didn't drink the juice right away. I set it to the side and watched her move around my kitchen the way she had started doing over the past year. Opening cabinets, checking drawers, picking things up and putting them down in slightly different places, as if she was already taking inventory. My son stood at the counter scrolling through his phone, laughing at something on the screen. He didn't look up when I walked in. He hadn't really looked at me in months. I remember thinking, something is wrong. Not in a dramatic way. Not the way you feel when there's an emergency. More like the way your body knows rain is coming before a single cloud appears. Quiet. Certain. The feeling settled in my chest and stayed there. I am a retired registered nurse. I spent 31 years at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I was a charge nurse for the last 14 of those years, which means I managed staff, managed patients, managed families in the worst moments of their lives. I know how to read a room. I know what it looks like when someone is performing calm. And that morning, standing in my own kitchen on my own birthday, surrounded by my son and his wife and their 2 children running through my hallway, I understood with complete clarity that I was being managed. I just didn't know the full extent of it yet. My name is Peggy. I was married for 38 years to a man named Robert, who died of a heart attack 3 years ago last April. We built this house together in 1991. We picked out every piece of trim, every cabinet, every tile in the master bathroom. Robert used to say the house was just wood and drywall, that it was us who made it a home. I used to argue with him about that. Now I think maybe we were both right. After Robert died, my son suggested I might want to sell and move somewhere smaller, something more manageable. I was 69 years old. I had just lost my husband. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. He nodded and said he understood and drove back to Charlotte with his wife, and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The changes were gradual, the way the most dangerous things always are. My daughter-in-law began calling more often, twice a week at first, then every other day. She was warm on those calls, warmer than she had been in the early years of her marriage. She asked about my health, my medications, my sleep. She started forwarding me articles about aging in place and senior support resources, which I appreciated at first and then began to find strange, because I was perfectly healthy. I was still driving. I was still cooking for myself. I was still doing the Sunday crossword in pen. My son started visiting more, too. Every 6 weeks or so, the 4 of them would drive up from Charlotte and stay the weekend. My grandchildren, a boy of 12 and a girl of 9, would fill the house with noise, and I loved it. But I started to notice that my son and his wife were always whispering. In the kitchen after I went to bed, on the back porch before I woke up, conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I told myself I was imagining things. I was grieving. I was getting older. I was projecting. I was not imagining things. The first concrete sign came 14 months ago. I had a routine checkup with my primary care physician, Dr. Okafor, who I have seen for 11 years. Afterward, I stopped at the grocery store and ran into my neighbor, Carolyn, who mentioned that my daughter-in-law had called her the previous week. Just to check in, she said. Just to see how I was doing generally. Carolyn thought it was sweet. I stood in the cereal aisle and felt something cold move through me because my daughter-in-law had never called Carolyn in the 8 years I had lived next to her. Not once. I went home and I sat at the kitchen table and I made a list. It's a habit from nursing. When something doesn't add up clinically, you write it down. You look for the pattern. What I wrote down that afternoon, bullet point by bullet point, was this: the increased calls, the questions about my health, the articles she kept sending, the whispered conversations, the call to Carolyn. I looked at that list for a long time. Then I called my financial advisor. Gerald has managed my retirement accounts since Robert and I were in our mid-50s. He is meticulous, old-fashioned, and completely unflappable. When I asked him to walk me through every account and tell me if anything had changed in the past 18 months, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Peggy, I was actually going to call you." 2 months earlier, my son had contacted Gerald's office. He had introduced himself as my primary caregiver and asked about the process for adding a joint account holder to my investment accounts. Gerald had told him that any changes of that nature would require my direct written authorization and ended the call. He had assumed I knew about it. I had not known about it. I kept my voice even. I thanked Gerald. I told him not to make any changes to anything without hearing from me directly, and that if my son or his wife contacted him again, he should let me know immediately. Gerald said he would. When I hung up the phone, I sat in the kitchen for a very long time without moving. I was not angry yet. What I felt was closer to grief. The specific grief of watching someone you love reveal themselves to be someone you didn't fully know. My son was 57 years old. He had been a good boy, not perfect, but good. He had held my hand at Robert's funeral. He had cried at the graveside, real tears, the kind you cannot fake. And now he was calling my financial advisor to ask about joint accounts without telling me. I needed to understand how deep this went before I did anything. I have a younger sister named Ruth who lives in Dayton. Ruth is 64, sharp as a tack, and has zero patience for nonsense of any kind. I drove to Dayton on a Thursday and told her everything over coffee. She didn't say much while I talked, which is unusual for Ruth. When I finished, she set down her mug and said, "Peggy, you need to call an attorney." I already had a name. One of the physicians at St. Vin, Catherine's, a woman I had worked with for many years, had gone through something similar with her own mother's estate. She had recommended an elder law attorney named Patricia Howe, who practiced in Columbus. I called Patricia's office the following Monday. Patricia is a compact, direct woman in her early 60s who does not waste words. In our first meeting, I laid out everything I knew: the calls to Carolyn, the contact with Gerald, the whispering, the pattern of questions about my health and cognition. She listened without interrupting, made notes, and then asked me 2 questions. First, did I have a current will? Yes, drafted 12 years ago, naming my son as primary beneficiary. Second, did I have a durable power of attorney in place? Yes, also naming my son, also drafted 12 years ago. Patricia set down her pen. "Those documents," she said, "are the reason you're sitting in my office." She explained what a guardianship petition was. She explained that in the state of Ohio, an interested party, including an adult child, could file a petition with the probate court claiming that an elderly parent lacked the capacity to manage their own affairs. The court would then appoint a physician or psychologist to evaluate the person. If that evaluation supported the claim, the court could appoint a guardian, often the person who filed the petition, to make legal, financial, and medical decisions on the elder's behalf. She said it more gently than I am writing it now, but the substance was the same. I asked her what would trigger such a petition. She said that in her experience, the petitioner typically documented a pattern of behaviors: confusion, poor financial decisions, inability to manage daily tasks, and presented that documentation to the court. I thought about my daughter-in-law's calls to Carolyn. I thought about the questions about my sleep and my medications. I thought about all of it differently. They had been building a file. I want to be clear about something. I do not know for certain that my son understood the full scope of what his wife was doing. I have thought about this more hours than I can count. What I know is that he contacted my financial advisor without telling me. What I believe is that his wife was the architect of most of this, and that my son, who has never been a strong man in the way Robert was strong, went along with it because she told him it was the right thing to do, that they were protecting me, that they were being responsible. People can convince themselves of almost anything when they want something badly enough. What I did next, I did carefully, and I did quietly. Patricia drew up a new will and a revocable living trust. Under the trust structure, my assets, the house, the investment accounts, everything, transferred into the trust immediately with me as the trustee during my lifetime. I named Ruth as successor trustee. My son was removed as primary beneficiary. I divided the estate between Ruth, a nursing scholarship fund at St. Min, Catherine's that Robert and I had contributed to for years, and my son's 2 children directly, not through him, to them, in a separate educational trust that Patricia structured so neither he nor his wife could access or redirect. I signed the paperwork on a Friday in October. I told no one. Not Ruth, not Carolyn, not anyone. I went home and I made chicken soup from scratch, and I watched the evening news, and I went to bed and I slept better than I had in 8 months. My birthday is the second Saturday in November. My son and his wife and the grandchildren drove up the Thursday before. My daughter-in-law brought flowers, sunflowers, my favorite, which I have mentioned exactly once in her presence in the past 12 years, which means she has been paying attention to details about me for longer than I realized, or someone helped her remember. My son grilled steaks on Friday evening, and the grandchildren helped me decorate the kitchen table with little paper leaves they had cut out and colored at home. My granddaughter made one that said, "Happy Birthday, Grammy," in purple marker with a heart dotting the I. I kept that one. On Saturday morning, my son drove to pick up my sister-in-law, Robert's sister Dolores, who lives 20 minutes away and who I have known for 40 years. My daughter-in-law stayed behind. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when she came and sat across from me. She poured herself a cup, settled in, and said that she had arranged something special for my birthday. A wellness consultation, she called it. A doctor who specialized in cognitive health for seniors was going to join us by video call that afternoon. She said it as though she were giving me a gift. I set down my coffee cup. I looked at her face. She was doing the smile again. I said, "Is that right?" She said yes. She had been a little worried about me lately, that she knew I would never say anything if something were wrong, that she just wanted to make sure I was getting the support I needed, that this was what families did for each other. She reached across the table and put her hand on top of mine. Her hand was warm. She had been practicing this, I think. The warmth, the language, the hand. I let her finish. I did not pull my hand away. Then I stood up and I went to the bedroom where I had my purse, and I came back to the kitchen table and I set down a sealed envelope. She looked at it. She looked at it. She looked at me. I sat back down and I picked up my coffee. "Before your doctor calls this afternoon," I said, "I think you should read that." The envelope contained a letter from Patricia's office, a single page on firm letterhead dated the previous Friday, summarizing the establishment of the Margaret Louise Harrington Revocable Living Trust, the transfer of all assets into said trust, the appointment of Ruth Ann Kemper as successor trustee, and the amended beneficiary designations. It was not a legal document in itself. It was a summary, written plainly so that anyone reading it would understand exactly what it meant. My daughter-in-law read it twice. I watched her read it. The second time, her jaw moved slightly like she was counting something. She put the letter down on the table. She didn't look up right away. I said, "I called Gerald 2 weeks ago as well. All account access has been returned to single-party authorization. He'll need written authorization from me, specifically from me, for any changes going forward." The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. She said, her voice careful now, stripped of the warmth. "Peggy, I was only trying to help." I said, "I know." She said, "Everything we've done has been because we care about you." I said, "I know you believe that." I got up and refilled my coffee, and I started slicing the birthday cake Ruth had brought over the night before, a lemon layer cake with cream cheese frosting, my favorite since I was 12 years old. I cut 2 slices and put them on plates, and I set one in front of her and I kept one for myself. She sat there holding the letter. She did not eat the cake. My son came back with Dolores about 40 minutes later. Whatever my daughter-in-law said to him in the hallway when he first walked in, and she did pull him aside. She did say something. I could see the way his posture changed. It was not enough to prepare him for the afternoon. By the time the video call was scheduled to occur, there was no call. My daughter-in-law said she had rescheduled. She said it lightly to the room in general. Dolores didn't know what any of it meant. The grandchildren were in the backyard. My son looked at me across the living room with an expression I had not seen on his face in a very long time. When he was young, maybe 12 or 13, he used to look at Robert and me that way when he knew he had done something he could not undo. Like he was already sorry, and already calculating whether sorry would be enough. It was a strange birthday. We ate cake. The grandchildren came inside and we played a card game, and my granddaughter beat everyone twice. Dolores told a story about Robert from when they were teenagers that made me laugh until I had to wipe my eyes. My son sat in the armchair by the window and was quieter than usual. My daughter-in-law was impeccably polite and never once stopped smiling. They left Sunday morning. My son hugged me at the door, longer than he usually does. He didn't say anything. I held on for a moment, and then I let go. I stood on the front porch and watched them back out of the driveway. My daughter-in-law looked straight ahead. The grandchildren waved from the back seat. I went inside and washed the dishes and put everything back where it belonged. 3 weeks later, my son called. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7, which is when he used to call when the children were small, and that was just part of the rhythm of our weeks. He said he was sorry. He said he had convinced himself they were helping, that I needed more support than I was willing to admit, that his wife had made it seem so reasonable. He said he understood if I was angry. I told him I wasn't angry, which was true. Anger had come and gone quickly, back in those early weeks when I first understood what was happening. What had stayed was something sadder and more permanent, a shift, the way a bone heals after a break, knit back together but changed in its structure. I told him that I loved him. I told him that I had loved him since before he was born, and that would not change. I told him that trust was a different thing from love, and that love was not something I was withdrawing, but that trust would have to be built again slowly, and I was not going to pretend otherwise to make him feel better. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he understood. We talk every 2 weeks now. He comes up at Thanksgiving and Christmas without his wife, who says she thinks it's better to give us time. Maybe she means it. Probably she is also simply avoiding me, which is fine. My grandchildren FaceTime me every Sunday. My granddaughter is teaching me a card game that I keep losing. She finds this extremely funny. Ruth comes over on the first Tuesday of every month, and we do the crossword together. She still uses a pen, same as me. This past spring, I signed up to volunteer at St. Lucia, Catherine's, working with the palliative care unit 2 afternoons a week. I sit with patients. Sometimes I hold a hand. Sometimes I just listen. It is the work I was always best at, being present with someone in a moment they cannot get through alone. I am 72 years old. I sleep well. I keep my own house. I know exactly where my money is and exactly who will receive it when I am gone, and those decisions were made by me, for reasons I chose, in full possession of every faculty I have ever had. I think about the women who don't have a Ruth to call, who don't have a Gerald who calls back, who don't have 31 years of learning to read what a room is really saying underneath the surface of what's being performed. I think about them more than I used to. I don't know what to do with that thought yet, but I have learned not to let an important thought go until it tells me what it needs from me. The lemon cake recipe is written on an index card in my recipe box, in my mother's handwriting. She made it for my birthday every year from the time I can remember until I was 26, when I moved to Ohio and she was gone 4 years later. On my birthday this year, I made it myself. I sat at the kitchen table alone with my coffee and my cake and the Sunday crossword, and outside the window, the maple in the front yard was doing what it does every November, turning that particular shade of orange that only lasts for about 5 days before everything falls. Robert used to say it was the tree's way of making the most of things. I watched it for a while. Then I picked up my pen and started on the crossword.